Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever noticed that those who speak the loudest often understand the least? Let me ask you this. When was the last time you sat with your thoughts quietly and truly listened? Not to the world, not to your friends, not even to your own voice. Just silence. That's where it begins. Mastery isn't about controlling the world. It's about not letting the world control you. In a time where everyone is screaming to be heard, the one who stays quiet becomes magnetic, unpredictable, respected. There's a mystery to silence. It unsettles people. It makes them lean in. And in that stillness, you gain clarity. You stop reacting and start observing. You see, silence is not weakness. It is strategy. It is strength wrapped in humility. When you stay quiet, you begin to notice how noisy the world is. People argue to dominate. They explain to impress. They react to defend. But when you stay silent, you let them expose themselves. You don't interrupt. You don't compete. You just watch. This is not passive living. This is mastery through restraint. Because power is not loud. Real power moves quietly. When you master your words, you master your emotions. When you master your emotions, you master your energy. And when you master your energy, you master your life. The world tells you to speak up, to shout louder, to express yourself. But what if true expression, true presence, doesn't need noise at all? What if your silence said more than 1,000 explanations? The person who can sit in a room and say nothing, yet still command respect, is not ordinary. Classical, they've reached a deeper state. They no longer need approval, applause, or validation, because they've become whole within. You're not here to argue your worth. You're here to live it. Stay quiet, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've realized not everything deserves a response. When you no longer react, you become untouchable. No one can use your words against you. No one can drain your energy. No one can shake your foundation. Stillness is not stagnation. It is depth. And in that depth, you find yourself. You start to see how much of life is a performance. People wear masks, speak in rehearsed lines, play roles. But you sit in silence and you see the truth. You don't respond to gossip. You don't explain your decisions. You don't defend your growth. Because you know that silence does what noise never can. It speaks to the soul. Let them wonder. Let them assume. Let them talk. Your silence is not absence. It is intention. When the mind is quiet, the heart speaks. When the noise fades, wisdom rises. And when you no longer chase the world's approval, you finally walk your own path. So stay quiet. Master your mind. Master your emotions. Master your presence. And in doing so, you master your life. Silence is the highest form of power, not because it dominates through force, but because it speaks through presence. In a world obsessed with talking, reacting, explaining, and proving, the person who remains silent becomes an anomaly, a mystery. That mystery is power. Most people assume power must be loud, commanding, and seen. But true power often chooses invisibility. It's calm, it's still, it's watchful. It doesn't react impulsively. It responds with wisdom. And many cannot comprehend the strength it takes to remain quiet when ego wants to shout, when emotions demand release, when pride aches for defense. But silence, when intentional, is the highest form of discipline. It's the shield that protects your energy and the sword that sharpens your awareness. When you stop pouring yourself into every argument, every opinion, every reaction, you begin to contain yourself, and that containment is magnetic. People are drawn to the silent one, not because of what they say, but because of what they don't. There's an unspoken command in stillness that louder voices cannot replicate. Every word you speak is energy. When you are constantly giving explanations, reacting emotionally, or responding to noise, you are giving away your essence. You dilute yourself. But when you choose silence, you preserve your power. You begin to control the flow of your own energy. And that control, over time, becomes influence. Not the kind of influence that begs for attention, but the kind that silently shifts the atmosphere of a room when you enter it. Silence isn't the absence of communication. It's the most refined form of it. It says, I don't need to prove anything. I am secure in myself. And that security creates fear in those who depend on approval, performance, or attention to feel seen. They won't understand your stillness. They'll call it arrogance. They'll accuse you of detachment, but they will never be able to ignore you because your silence says something their noise never could. It says, you have mastered yourself. The one who stays quiet is not passive. They are simply listening, observing, absorbing. And when they do speak, their words cut deeper. Their words carry weight because they are not thrown into the wind casually. They are released with purpose, from a place of alignment, not from a place of reaction. That is why silence is not only powerful, it is transformative. It changes how you relate to the world. It shifts your posture from needing to be heard to choosing what deserves your voice. Think about it. How many regrets in your life are tied to something you said in haste, in anger, in pain? How many situations would have resolved themselves, unraveled naturally, or faded peacefully had you just stayed quiet? Silence is not submission. It's strategy. It's choosing to rise above a level of noise. It's choosing to respond only when the response will uplift, not when it will escalate. It's knowing that you don't have to win arguments. You just have to win your own peace. The more you practice this kind of silence, the more you begin to master your inner world. The less you speak, the more you notice. You notice your own patterns. You notice what triggers you. You notice the motivations of others. And you stop being so easily moved by external chaos because you have created internal calm. And internal calm is the true seat of power. You don't have to tell the world what you're doing. You don't have to announce your plans. You don't have to respond to criticism. Let your actions speak. Let your energy speak. Let your silence be the loudest thing in the room. Because silence, when chosen with intention, is louder than noise. It commands more respect than shouting. It carries more truth than any justification. In silence, you reclaim control over yourself. And once you have that, no one can control you again. That is why silence is not just powerful, it is the highest form of power. It is presence without performance, strength without aggression, wisdom without words. And when you begin to embody that, you don't just master your emotions, you begin to master your life. Speaking less reveals more, not only about the world around you, but also about yourself. When you choose to stay quiet, you become a mirror. People reveal themselves in your silence. They fill the space with their truth, often without realizing it. They show their intentions, their insecurities, their values, and their fears. While most people are trying to talk over each other to be heard, the one who listens quietly begins to see everything that lies beneath the surface. You begin to notice patterns in behavior, hidden motives behind words, the tone behind the message. And in that quiet observation, you gain clarity others miss. Words are often used to cover up what people don't want you to see. They use them to control perception, to protect image, to manipulate impressions. But if you stay silent, if you simply let them speak, they unravel. Because silence makes people uncomfortable. It pressures them to explain, to justify, to keep talking until their truth slips out. In a way, when you speak less, you give others the space to expose themselves. And they always do. More importantly, speaking less reveals more about your own internal landscape. It forces you to sit with your reactions before expressing them. It gives you time to reflect instead of instinctively responding. When you say less, you think more. You begin to understand the root of your emotions instead of just acting on them. You learn to separate impulse from wisdom. And that space between thought and speech, that pause, is where self-mastery begins. Silence teaches you discipline. It reveals your urges to be understood, validated, praised, or defended. And when you resist those urges, you begin to detach from your ego. You stop needing the world to agree with you. You stop chasing approval. You realize that truth doesn't require explanation, and your worth doesn't need public confirmation. Speaking less puts you in control, not only of your words, but of your emotions and your identity. This doesn't mean silence is about suppression. It doesn't mean hiding your voice or your truth. It means using your voice consciously, with precision. It means understanding the power of timing, the weight of presence, and the strength of restraint. Because when you speak less, your words become more valuable. People start to listen more closely. Your silence creates anticipation. And when you finally speak, your words carry impact, not because they are loud, but because they are rare and intentional. When you speak less, you conserve your mental energy. You don't drain yourself by engaging in meaningless conversations or defending yourself against misunderstandings. You learn that not every opinion deserves a response. Not every insult requires defense. You rise above the noise. And in doing so, you begin to elevate your mind, your focus, your priorities. You redirect your energy from reacting to everything to building something deeper within yourself. There's a quiet confidence that comes from saying little. You no longer feel the need to prove how smart, strong, or right you are. You become more secure in your path. You stop broadcasting your moves, your plans, your inner world. And in that privacy, you grow, you evolve, you transform quietly, while the world talks loudly. The fewer words you use, the more intentional you become. You stop giving away your energy through careless conversation. You stop revealing your vulnerabilities to those who haven't earned your trust. You stop diluting your essence in places where it won't be valued. And as a result, you become sharper. You become centered. You become powerful in a way that doesn't need recognition. Speaking less is not about becoming invisible. It's about becoming undeniable. Your presence, your actions, your silence, they begin to speak for you. And in that space of quiet strength, you begin to see the world clearly, move deliberately, and live with a power that doesn't need to shout. You simply become the one who understands more, feels more, and reveals less. And that kind of presence cannot be ignored. Stillness amplifies awareness in a way that no amount of movement or noise ever can. When you become still, internally and externally, you begin to perceive life with a sharper, more focused mind. Most people live in a constant state of motion, reacting to one thing after another, running from one distraction to the next. They are always doing, always talking, always reaching. And yet, they rarely see clearly. Because awareness doesn't bloom in chaos. When you choose to be still, you pull yourself out of the rushing current of the world. You step away from the noise, the opinions, the expectations. You begin to observe rather than participate in the endless game of reaction. In this stillness, your senses heighten. Your mind, no longer cluttered with stimulus, begins to notice the subtleties, the tone of someone's voice when they're hiding something, the feeling in your chest when something's off, the thoughts that you've been avoiding by staying busy. Everything becomes clearer. And that clarity leads to wisdom. Stillness is not idleness. It is not laziness. It is presence. It is the conscious decision to sit with yourself and truly see. Because the truth is, awareness isn't something you chase. It's something you uncover. And the only way to uncover it is to slow down, to stop running, to stop speaking, just to fill the void. In stillness, you learn to feel what's underneath the surface. You begin to hear what your body has been trying to tell you, what your heart has been whispering beneath all the noise. People often fear stillness because it brings them face to face with themselves. It strips away the distractions and reveals what's really going on inside. But that confrontation is the beginning of transformation. You cannot change what you're unaware of, and you cannot become aware if you are never still. Stillness also sharpens your intuition. When your mind is calm, your inner voice becomes louder. You begin to trust it more, not because it shouts, but because it speaks from a place of peace. You don't second guess every decision. You don't overthink every step. You simply feel what's right. And that inner clarity becomes a guide. It leads you through confusion, through fear, through uncertainty. It becomes your compass. The world rewards speed, urgency, instant response. But mastery, true mastery, requires patience. It requires reflection. It requires the kind of awareness that only comes from stillness. When you're not always reacting, you start to anticipate. You start to see the game being played, not just the pieces being moved. You begin to understand what others miss simply because you're paying attention on a deeper level. The stillness also allows you to detach from the emotions that usually control you. You learn to sit with anger without acting on it. You observe fear without shrinking because of it. You feel sadness without drowning in it. You become the watcher, not the slave of your emotions. And that shift from being controlled to being conscious is where your power begins to grow. When you are still, you no longer operate on impulse. You operate on insight. You no longer move just because others are moving. You move with intention, with clarity, with direction. Your actions become precise. Your words become thoughtful. Your energy becomes focused. You stop scattering yourself into 1,000 directions and instead channel your strength into what truly matters. In a loud world, stillness is a rebellion. It is the decision to reclaim your mind, your attention, your life. It is a return to self, a moment of alignment. And from that alignment comes awareness, and from awareness, mastery. You don't need to chase awareness. You need to slow down long enough for it to catch you. And that happens in stillness. That happens when you stop talking, stop reacting, and simply allow yourself to be. In that space, something profound occurs. You begin to see. You see others. You see life. You see yourself. And once you see clearly, you can no longer live unconsciously. You begin to act with purpose. You begin to speak with depth. You begin to walk your path, not blindly, but with full awareness. That is the gift of stillness. That is where your mastery begins. You control the narrative by withholding yours. This may seem counterintuitive in a culture where everyone is encouraged to share everything, to post every thought, explain every choice, and broadcast every move. But the moment you stop oversharing, stop explaining, stop feeling the need to be understood, you take back control. You become the author of your story, not a character desperately trying to be liked in someone else's version of it. Most people are addicted to being understood. They want to clarify, justify, and make sure everyone knows why they did what they did. But this obsession with being understood gives away your power. You hand over control of your identity, your intentions, and your path to the opinions of others, and in trying to manage how you're perceived, you actually become more vulnerable to misunderstanding, judgment, and manipulation. But when you withhold your narrative, when you stop volunteering explanations for your silence, your growth, your boundaries, you create space. And in that space, people begin to wonder. They fill in the blanks with their own stories, their own assumptions. That's natural. But here's the secret. You don't have to correct them. Because your power lies in what they don't know, not in what they think they do. By choosing not to explain yourself, you free yourself from the exhausting task of constantly managing how others see you. You let go of their expectations, their projections, their labels. You step out of their frame and create your own. In that space of mystery, you gain psychological leverage. Because the less people know, the more carefully they treat you. Ambiguity creates caution. People are less likely to attack what they don't fully understand. They hesitate, they observe, they respect what they can't predict. Withholding your narrative also protects your vision. When you keep your goals, your dreams, your healing private, you guard them from premature judgment, criticism, and distortion. Not everything needs to be said while it's still growing. Silence becomes a greenhouse. And in that protected space, your transformation unfolds without interference. You don't owe the world a front row seat to your process. There's a quiet kind of authority that emerges when you don't explain yourself. When someone questions your decision and you simply say, "That's what I've chosen," without elaboration, without apology. That's power. It shows that your confidence isn't rooted in approval. It's rooted in self-awareness. You're not seeking validation. You're embodying certainty. And people feel that. They may not say it, but they feel it deeply. Withholding your narrative is not about manipulation. It's not about playing games. It's about maturity. It's about understanding that not everyone is entitled to your truth. Not everyone has the capacity to hold it. Not everyone will understand your motives, and they don't have to. Silence in this sense is not absence. It's intention. It says, "I know who I am. I don't need you to." When you stop needing to be understood, you liberate yourself. You give yourself permission to evolve without explanation. You allow yourself to change your mind without defending it. You start living for your alignment, not their agreement. And that shift changes everything. There's strength in being a mystery. Not a mystery in the sense of being evasive or secretive, but in being whole and self-contained. You don't spill your truth in places that don't honor it. You don't translate your soul into a language that others can't or won't understand. You live it. You embody it. And in doing so, you become untouchable. So let people wonder. Let them speculate. Let them create their own stories. That's not your burden to carry. Your only task is to live your truth so fully, so silently, so deeply, that no explanation is ever needed. You control the narrative, not by speaking louder, not by convincing everyone to understand, but by knowing when to say nothing at all. Because the most powerful stories are not the ones told, they are the ones lived. Quietly, intentionally, authentically. Emotionally detached does not mean emotionally numb. It is one of the most misunderstood states of mind, often mistaken for coldness, indifference, or a lack of care. But true emotional detachment is not about turning off your feelings. It's about learning how to hold them without letting them control you. It's about observing your emotions without drowning in them. It's about feeling fully, yet responding wisely. Most people are emotionally reactive. They feel something, anger, hurt, excitement, fear, and immediately act on it. Their emotions dictate their words, their behavior, their decisions. This kind of emotional entanglement creates chaos, pain, and regret. But when you cultivate emotional detachment, you learn to pause. You give yourself the space to feel without collapsing. You create distance between stimulus and response. That distance is where clarity lives. And with clarity comes strength. Emotional detachment is a form of self-respect. It says, I can care deeply, but I will not be consumed. It allows you to love without losing yourself, to listen without absorbing toxicity, to support others without sacrificing your peace. In detachment, you stop bleeding for people who would never offer you a bandage. You stop overextending in places that only drain you. You stop making decisions from desperation, fear, or longing. This doesn't make you heartless, on the contrary. It allows your heart to be stable, grounded, and wise. It protects your energy so that you can show up with presence, not emotional turbulence. Detachment doesn't close the heart. It protects its rhythm. It allows love to be offered from a place of abundance, not depletion. One of the clearest signs of growth is your ability to feel everything, every heartbreak, every disappointment, every trigger, without immediately reacting. You observe, you sit with it, you understand the story behind the feeling, and then you choose your response. That choice is power. That choice is freedom. When you are emotionally detached, you no longer try to control how others feel about you. You don't chase closure. You don't beg for validation. You don't argue for your worth. You know that people see you through the lens of their own wounds, and you don't take it personally. You've stopped letting someone else's chaos dictate your inner climate. Their anger doesn't shake your peace. Their silence doesn't make you question your value. Emotional detachment also means you let go of outcomes. You stop clinging to how things should be. You stop trying to force connections, timelines, or identities. You begin to flow with life instead of fighting it. You show up, you give your best, and you release the rest. That surrender isn't weakness, it's the highest form of emotional maturity. Because it says, I trust myself to adapt. I trust life to unfold. I trust that what is meant for me will find me without me having to lose myself trying to hold it. And in that surrender, life becomes lighter. You're no longer weighed down by the emotional storms of others or the mental chatter of your own mind. You become more present, more centered. You see clearly what deserves your energy and what doesn't. You begin to move differently. You don't react, you respond. You don't cling, you flow. You don't overthink. You observe. This is emotional mastery, not through avoidance, but through awareness. You are no longer a prisoner to your inner world. You've become its conscious architect. You understand that emotions are not facts. They are visitors, signals, teachers, and you welcome them without letting them rearrange the furniture of your life. So, no, emotional detachment is not emotional numbness. Numbness is the inability to feel. Detachment is the ability to feel everything and still choose peace. It's being fully awake, yet completely steady. It's the quiet knowing that you are enough no matter what happens outside of you. This kind of strength doesn't make you invincible. It makes you wise. It makes you resilient. It makes you free. Because when you can feel without being ruled, love without losing yourself, and let go without falling apart, you've truly begun to master your life. You don't owe explanations. Not for your silence, not for your growth, not for the way you choose to protect your peace. We live in a world that demands constant justification, as if your existence must be approved before it is valid. Every choice you make, every step you take, seems to require a statement, an apology, a reason that satisfies others. But the truth is, maturity begins when you realize that your life is not a public trial. You do not have to defend yourself against misunderstandings, nor are you required to shrink your truth to make others comfortable. When you constantly explain yourself, you unconsciously give away power. You are placing your worth in the hands of others, waiting for them to accept or approve of your choices. But when you no longer feel the need to explain, you reclaim that power. You recognize that your decisions are rooted in your awareness, your values, and your vision, none of which need external permission to exist. Your peace doesn't need to be understood to be real. Silence in this context is not avoidance, it is liberation. You stop leaking energy into conversations that go in circles. You stop opening your soul to minds that cannot hold it. You stop watering deserts, hoping something will grow. And in doing so, you begin to move in alignment with your deeper self, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but out of clarity. You begin to do things because they are right for you, not because they are easily explained to them. There's a quiet freedom that comes when you realize you are allowed to evolve without reporting your every transformation. You are allowed to change direction without justifying the detour. You are allowed to choose solitude over company, peace over noise, depth over approval. You are allowed to outgrow environments, habits, and even people, without a formal announcement or explanation. In fact, the more you grow, the less you explain, because growth is often invisible to those who aren't growing with you. They won't understand why you're less available, why your conversations have shifted, or why you no longer participate in the same cycles. And they don't have to. Let them misinterpret your silence. Let them fill in the blanks with their assumptions. Your path is not their business. Your journey is not their courtroom. You don't owe anyone the story of your healing. You don't owe them the blueprint of your boundaries. You don't have to make sense to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing and let your life speak for itself. Because when your presence is aligned with your purpose, explanations become unnecessary. Your energy communicates what words never could. This doesn't mean you become distant or closed off. It means you become intentional. You learn to discern who deserves access to your inner world and who only seeks to rearrange it. You speak when there is value, not when there is pressure. You share when it nourishes, not when it depletes. You recognize that your truth, your peace, and your progress are sacred, and not everyone has earned the right to witness them. Let them wonder why you no longer explain yourself. Let them sit with their own discomfort when you no longer bend to fit their expectations. That discomfort is not your burden to ease. Your responsibility is to yourself, your peace, your evolution, your alignment. You don't need to argue your worth. You don't need to defend your intuition. You don't need to justify a life that honors your soul. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you begin to walk in true freedom. You become less tangled in the noise. You become less reactive to projection. You become grounded in your own knowing. And that knowing is more powerful than any approval you could ever receive. So no, you don't owe explanations, not because you're above anyone, but because you've finally come home to yourself. And that home needs no defense. Most regret comes from what was said in emotion. Think about that for a moment. Not the things you carefully considered, not the truths you spoke from stillness, but the impulsive words thrown out in a moment of anger, fear, pride, or pain. Those are the words that echo. They hang in the air, long after the moment has passed, haunting you with the weight of what can't be taken back. Because words, once spoken, can't be unsaid. They carry energy, meaning, and consequences. And when they are driven by raw emotion, rather than quiet clarity, they often cause harm to others and to yourself. How many relationships have cracked under the pressure of something shouted in the heat of the moment? How many opportunities were lost, bridges burned, or reputations damaged? Because someone couldn't hold their tongue for just a few seconds longer. It only takes a moment of emotional turbulence to say something you'll spend months or years wishing you hadn't. But by the time the dust settles, the damage is often done. You may apologize, you may explain, but words are powerful, and once they land, they leave marks. Learning to stay quiet in emotional moments is not about suppression, it's about wisdom. It's about knowing that feelings are temporary, but words are permanent. Anger fades, confusion clears, hurt heals. But the things said in the storm often become scars. When you are silent in the face of rising emotion, you give yourself the gift of space. Space to breathe, space to reflect, space to respond, not from ego, but from truth. There's a deep strength in restraint. It takes little effort to lash out, to defend yourself, to speak first and think later. That's what most people do. That's the path of least resistance. But those who pause, who remain still, who choose silence in the moment of intensity, they are the ones who hold true power, because they're not slaves to their emotions. They've learned that silence isn't weakness, it's protection. Not everything needs an immediate response. Not every insult requires a comeback. Not every misunderstanding demands an explanation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. Allow the emotion to rise, to pass, and then look at the situation with calm eyes. Often, what felt urgent in the heat of the moment becomes unimportant once you've cooled down. You realize the argument wasn't worth it. The words you were about to say weren't necessary. The fight you almost started wasn't going to lead anywhere meaningful. And sometimes it's not just about what you avoid saying to others. It's also about what you avoid saying to yourself. Harsh self-criticism, shame, blame, these often come rushing in during emotional lows. In those moments, silence becomes self-care. You pause. You let the emotion settle before you define yourself by it. You realize that just because you feel worthless doesn't mean you are. Just because you feel angry doesn't mean the world is against you. Emotions distort. Silence clarifies. Over time, you begin to trust silence more than reaction. You start to value the space between feeling and speaking. You see that most of your regrets could have been prevented by one simple choice: holding your tongue, waiting, listening, choosing calm over chaos. This is emotional intelligence in action. Not denying your emotions, but mastering them, letting them pass through you without letting them steer the wheel. And when you live like this, when you consistently choose silence over emotional impulsiveness, you start to notice something beautiful. Your relationships deepen. Your presence feels more grounded. Your decisions become more aligned. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry more weight. Because people know they come from clarity, not confusion. Thought, not impulse. Wisdom, not reaction. Regret doesn't come from silence. Regret comes from the things you couldn't hold back. The words that were too sharp, too fast, too loaded with emotion. But when you become the kind of person who sits with emotion instead of being consumed by it, you protect yourself and others from those moments of damage. You live with fewer apologies, fewer wounds to mend, fewer things to take back. So let silence be your shield. Let it protect your peace, your relationships, your integrity. Because in the stillness, you'll find something far more valuable than the temporary satisfaction of reacting. You'll find freedom from regret. And that is one of the deepest forms of mastery. Silence is a filter. It quietly reveals who truly values your presence beyond your words, who respects your energy without needing constant access to it, and who only listens to reply rather than understand. In a world that thrives on noise, constant talking, posting, sharing, oversharing, silence becomes a test. It sorts out the authentic from the performative. It draws a line between those who are truly connected to you and those who are only entertained by your voice, your attention, your emotional availability. When you stop speaking so often, when you withdraw your need to fill every space with conversation, something revealing begins to happen. The people who are only around for the drama, the validation, the stimulation, begin to disappear. They don't know how to engage with your silence because it doesn't feed them. It doesn't entertain their ego. It doesn't satisfy their hunger for reaction. But the ones who truly value you, they remain. They feel your presence, even when you're quiet. They're comfortable in the pause. They understand that connection is not about constant interaction. It's about energy alignment. Silence exposes the impatient. Those who can't sit in a moment without needing explanation or attention will show themselves quickly when you stop responding, immediately, or stop explaining every move. They will grow agitated, confused, perhaps even offended. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your silence doesn't give them the control they crave. Silence is uncomfortable for those who rely on access to feel significant. And that's exactly why it works as a filter. It reveals where the energy was never mutual, never genuine. But it also does something more profound. It deepens the connections that are real. When you choose silence, when you become selective with your words, those who truly understand you will not only stay, they'll draw closer. They'll begin to tune in more deeply. They'll listen to the tone of your silence, the frequency of your presence. They won't need you to speak constantly to feel connected. In fact, they'll respect your quiet even more than your explanations. This kind of silence is not passive, it's powerful. It allows space for observation. You begin to notice who listens with their heart and who only listens with their ears. You start to observe the intentions behind conversations, the quality of attention people bring, the way they speak about you when you are not around. Because when you go quiet, people reveal how they truly feel. In your silence, their masks slip off. Their patterns emerge. Their truth becomes visible. Silence also allows you to reset your boundaries without confrontation. You don't need to argue, defend, or prove anything. You simply withdraw your energy and observe. Watch who respects the boundary. Watch who pushes against it. Watch who silently honors your space and who takes offense to it. That is your clarity. That is your filter. You begin to realize that those who genuinely care for you don't need constant performance. They don't need you to always be entertaining, always available, always expressive. They hold space for your quiet. They welcome your solitude. They don't punish your withdrawal. They trust your return. And that kind of presence, quiet, steady, grounded, is rare. It can only be found when you've learnt to separate the noise from the real. You also filter your own thoughts through silence. You become more aware of what's worth saying and what's just reaction. You start to speak less, but with more purpose. Your words begin to carry precision. You no longer feel the need to share every feeling, every idea, every detail of your life. You realize that privacy isn't secrecy, it's power. And the more you keep within, the more powerful your energy becomes. It builds, it centers, it refines. So yes, silence is a filter. It's not about isolating yourself or becoming distant. It's about becoming aligned. Aligned with who you truly are and who truly values that. Aligned with peace rather than pressure. With presence rather than performance. Let silence do the work. Let it clean the space around you. Let it refine your connections, your energy, your life. In silence, you lose what was never real, and what remains is truth. What remains is strong, steady, and soul deep. And that is how silence becomes your greatest tool for clarity, connection, and self-mastery. Still water runs deep. It's a simple phrase, but it carries a profound truth. The depth of a person is rarely found in how much they say or how loudly they express themselves. It's discovered in the quiet power of their presence. In a world that often confuses noise with strength and visibility with value, the one who is calm, quiet, and composed is frequently overlooked. But they are the ones who see the most, feel the most. The quiet ones aren't empty. They're full of thoughts, awareness, insight, and depth that don't need constant expression to exist. They're not interested in being the center of attention because they don't need to be seen to feel real. Their depth isn't for display, it's for direction. They move with intention, not impulse. They speak with care, not volume. And because they're not shouting to be heard, when they do speak, people listen. Stillness isn't absence of motion. It's the presence of depth. Like a deep ocean that appears calm on the surface, yet holds powerful currents below, those who embody stillness are often the most emotionally and mentally grounded. They are not reactive because they are rooted. They are not hurried because they are focused. And they are not loud because their confidence comes from knowing, not proving. People often misunderstand quiet strength. They assume silence means weakness, that calm means indifference, that minimal expression means minimal feeling. But the opposite is true. Still water holds immense power. It moves subtly, but with impact. It carries depth without needing attention. And it sustains life in ways that loud waves never could. In the same way, a person who is still and deep carries a presence that speaks louder than words ever could. The world often celebrates the extroverted, the expressive, the ones who make the most noise. But the ones who stay silent, who observe first, who reflect before reacting, these are the ones who tend to hold the greatest internal power. They are not swayed by every storm. They are not disturbed by every opinion. They are anchored. And in that anchoring, they find clarity, peace, and strength that cannot be shaken. Stillness allows you to access parts of yourself that noise buries. It allows you to hear the whispers of your own intuition, to process emotion without performing it, to engage with life without reacting to every disruption. When you cultivate stillness, you stop living on the surface. You begin to explore your inner depths. You see what truly drives you, what truly matters, and what truly deserves your energy. The deep ones do not speak just to fill silence. They speak with purpose. They don't move just to be seen. They move when it matters. Their quietness is not a gap to be filled. It's a statement in itself. It says, I don't need noise to be real. I don't need attention to exist. I know who I am, and that's enough. There is a rare beauty in depth. The world may not always recognize it immediately because it doesn't flash, doesn't shout, doesn't demand. But it's there, in the way someone carries themselves, the way they listen without interruption, the way they speak with weight rather than speed. These are the people who leave a lasting impact, not because they forced their presence, but because their presence was undeniable. You don't need to prove your depth. You don't need to explain your stillness. Just be it. Be the calm in the chaos. Be the ocean in a world of ripples. And let your quiet be the loudest thing about you, because still water truly does run deep. And in that depth there is strength, clarity, and unshakable power. When you master the art of being still, you master the art of being. And from that being comes everything else: awareness, purpose, direction, peace. Let the world chase noise. Let them fight to be heard. You stay still, stay deep, stay powerful, because the greatest truths, the greatest changes, the greatest transformations, they all begin in silence. Mastering your life does not begin with grand declarations or loud victories. It begins in silence. It begins when you no longer feel the need to prove, to perform, or to explain. It begins when you choose stillness over chaos, presence over reaction, and intention over impulse. This is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. When you stay quiet, you stop leaking your power into places that never deserved it. You begin to observe rather than absorb. You see people for who they are, not for who they pretend to be. You protect your peace, your energy, your evolution. And in doing so, you start to control your life, not by manipulating others, but by mastering yourself. Let the world speak. Let them assume, project, misunderstand. You don't have to correct them. Your silence will teach more than your words ever could, because in silence you grow roots. You sharpen your vision. You rise, not with noise, but with clarity and purpose. Stay quiet, not to disappear, but to become undeniable. Speak less, so your presence speaks more. And remember, the most powerful transformations are not the ones the world watches. They're the ones that happen when no one is looking, in the stillness, where true mastery is born